Hi everyone, in this video lecture we will be seeing how to create threads in Java. So there are two ways in which we can create threads. We have seen the life cycle of threads, what are the different stages through which a thread goes through, etc. Here in this video lecture we will be focusing on creation of threads. As you can see, there are two ways in which we can create threads. First way is by extending thread class. So this, you can see the two keywords that we have to focus on here in this sentence. First one is extending, that means the relation is inheritance, and see here it is a class. So that means by inheriting the thread class of Java we can create threads. That is the first way of creating threads. Another way of creating threads is implementing runnable interface. So here we know we have to take care of these two keywords. One is interface and the other one is implementing. So how to use an interface in Java program, we have to implement the interface. So runnable is an interface, thread is a class. So by inheriting thread class we can create threads. At the same time, by implementing runnable interface also we can create threads. First we will see how to create threads by extending the thread class provide constructors and methods to create and perform operations on thread. So thread is actually a class that is already available in Java. This class provides so many constructors. Constructors means methods having the same name as that of the class. That means methods with the same name, that is thread, inside this class. And it also gives us so many other methods so that we can perform different operations on a thread. Okay, and this line is very important because it extends object class. Object is also a class inside Java, and all classes that we write always inherits or they all will be the child class of this object class. And see, this portion of the sentence we have to remember because we will need this later. That means the thread class implements runnable interface. Okay, so thread class inherits object class and at the same time it implements runnable interface also. Okay, and why I said this we'll need this later, that we will see that we will be using runnable interface, then we will see what's the relation between thread and this runnable interface. So we mentioned about some constructors in thread class. So these are some of the commonly used constructors inside class thread. So we know what's a constructor. Constructors are methods having the same name as that of the class. So our class name is thread, therefore the constructor's name must be also thread. So this is one constructor, this is another constructor, this is the third one, this is the fourth one. Okay, these four constructors are commonly used, and see, this constructor does not have any parameter. Here this constructor is having one parameter, that is string name. Usually when we have to create threads by mentioning its name, suppose we want to create a thread by giving a name by our own, we can call this constructor. And we will see what's the purpose of these two constructors by an example. Now we know a class is actually a collection of methods. It's actually a class encapsulates so many methods and data that interact with each other. So since thread is a class, thread consists of so many methods. Among them, one method is public void run. Okay, this method is used to perform actions for a thread. That means when we implement a thread, what all things a thread has to do, we have to write those lines of code inside this method. So when a thread is running, the lines of code that gets executed are those written inside this method run. So as you can see, it does not have any parameter and does not return anything also. Then second method is void start. As the name indicates, it is for starting the thread. Okay, a thread starts its execution when we call this method start. Okay, Okay, so when we call this method, that is when the programmer writes a code statement for this code, for this method. Say suppose t1 is a thread object, then this method is inside the class thread. So to call this method we have to use the object of class thread. So suppose t1 is the object of class thread. To call this method I have to write t1.start. So when we write like that, actually JVM, that is Java Virtual Machine, it actually calls the run method on the thread. So even though we are calling the start method, the method that gets executed is the run method. Why? Because when we call the start method, Java Virtual Machine calls the run method. So if you are not calling this method, means JVM will not call the run method, then the thread will not start working. So if you want to start the thread, we have to call the method start, which automatically makes the JVM, Java Virtual Machine, to call the run method, and our thread starts execution. The next method is public void sleep, and it has got one parameter, and it is actually a long integer, and that represents the milliseconds. And this method is used for making our thread to stop its working temporarily. Suppose we want to make our thread to wait for some milliseconds, we can call this method. So again, if t1 is our thread, then t1.sleep of 500 means our thread will wait for 500 milliseconds. So whatever parameter we are giving for this sleep method, it will be considered as milliseconds. So even if we are giving 5 as the parameter, it will be considered as milliseconds itself. So that we have to take care of when we call this method sleep. Then another method is join. This method is used to wait for a thread to die. So suppose I have an object t1 of class thread, and if I am calling t1.join, then as long as t1 completes its work, all other threads will wait. So the other threads will start working only after the current thread on which this method is called is completed. So if I am writing t1.join, other threads will wait for t1 to complete its work. That's what we mean by waits for a thread to die. Some more methods inside class thread. Here get priority, as a name, as from the method name itself it is clear, it is used for getting the priority of a thread. Usually when we create a thread will get a default priority of 5. We can change that priority by using this method set priority. So this get priority and set priority, they use it for getting and setting the priority of threads. Priority of thread is very important when we talk about multi-threading, or suppose one thread is going on, it's working, and another thread interrupts. Then if the current thread have to stop, then the interrupting thread must have a priority greater than the current thread. So priority is very important in case of multi-threading and all, or interruptions and all. So for setting and getting priority of threads, we can use these two methods respectively. Then we have seen one constructor of class thread where we are giving names to thread and constructor thread having one parameter of string type, that is for giving names to thread. So if we have given names to a thread, if you want to know which thread is currently working by its name, then we can call this method string get name. So suppose t1 is the thread object. If I call t1.getName, I will get the name of the thread t1. T1 is actually object name, that is not equal to thread name. Thread name will be different from the object name. So suppose we want to get the object name, thread name, we can call this method. Similarly, we can change the name already given to a thread. Suppose I have given a name to thread when it is created. If I am thinking, or if I have to change that name later on, then I can call this method set name. So if t1 is the thread object, then t1.setName, and if I give a new name, then the current name will be changed to this new name. Okay. Now again, thread current thread. we want to know which thread is currently active. Okay, so in that case, in such cases, we have to call this method current thread. Then the currently executing thread reference object will be returned. So these are only some of the methods inside the class thread. There are so many other methods available, but these are the most commonly used or most frequently used methods. Okay. Now we will come back to our topic, that is how to create threads. So first way is by extending thread class. So we have to remember only two steps when we have to create threads by using or by this method. So step 1 is override run method available in thread class. So inside thread class we have inside the class thread there is one method run that we have seen just few seconds back. You can just scroll down and you can see the list of methods inside class thread. The first method was run, and we told that we'll be writing those lines of code to be executed inside that method. So already thread class has got a method named run. So what we will do is we will be, first of all we have to extend the thread class. So by inheritance the methods inside thread class will be available to our class. So we will override already available run method of thread class. We will write our own lines of code inside the run method, so that when the new thread is created, the lines of code that gets executed will be what we have written inside the run method. And this is the syntax of run method, public void run. Then step 2 is create a thread object and start its working. To start working we have to call the start method. Okay, so first of all we have to override the run method, then create the thread object and start its working by calling the start method. So we have seen just before, when we call the start method, it's a Java virtual machine that calls the run method automatically. So even if we are calling the method start, actually the method that gets executed is run method. We will see one example. So these are the two steps that we have to keep in mind when we think of creating threads by extending thread class. So extending thread class, I always once again I remember you, it's actually inheritance. Extends keyword is for inheritance, and we are inheriting a class. The class name is thread. This is one of the way in which we can create thread. We will see one example and then we will explain it. So this is an example showing how we can create threads by using by extending thread class. See, I'm creating a new class. The class name is thread demo, and it is extending the class thread. That means thread is the parent class and this thread demo is our child class. Then inside that I am declaring one thread name variable. It's of type string and it is private. That means only the members inside this class thread demo can access this thread name variable because it is private. Or in other words, this thread name can be accessed by anybody that lies inside this pair of curly brackets between the curly brackets of class thread demo. It is not possible to access thread name from anybody outside the class thread demo. So then this is the constructor, that is thread demo is a constructor, the same name as that of the class name, so it's a method, so it's a constructor. It is receiving one parameter of type string. Then what I am doing is I am assigning the value of this parameter to this private variable string thread name equal to name. Here thread name is a private variable and name is the parameter. Then I am just printing creating plus thread name. So this constructor will be called whenever we create an object of class thread demo. Okay, so now coming back to the steps. So this is not that required. Okay, this is not that compulsory because this is actually constructor. This is for creating object of class thread demo. So now you can scroll back and see that two steps. The first step is to override the run method. That's what we have done here. I have overridden the run method, so I have written my run method here. Since this thread demo class extends thread, inside this thread class there is a run method. So by inheritance, thread demo will get that method. Apart from that, I am writing one more run method inside the thread demo. So that becomes method overriding. Hope you know what is method overriding is. If you don't know, just So just go back to some of our classes and just remind yourself what is method overriding. So here what happens is we are overriding the run method inside thread class. Okay, so inside thread there is one run method. Similarly, this thread demo being the child class of class thread, we have one more run method. So basically this thread demo will have access to two run methods, one that is written here, the other one that it got by inheritance from class thread. So inside run method I have written my logic, that is whenever my thread have to run or whenever my thread start execution, these are the lines that will get executed. So I am writing system.out.println running thread name, so which thread is running that will be visible. Then I am starting a for loop, then there also I am printing thread name and the value of I. Then I am making the thread to sleep for 50 milliseconds. See how I am calling thread dot sleep of 50. Okay, I am making the thread to sleep for 50 milliseconds. Okay, and if an interrupt occurs, this is the when the thread is getting executed, if an interrupt occurs, then this may raise an exception, so we have to write these lines of code inside the try catch block. It means when we execute this thread there is a chance of getting interrupted, so what will we do, we will write in these lines of code inside try block, and what kind of exception we are expecting we will catch it outside the try block and we will print that. And then at last system.out.println I am printing this thread is exiting. Okay, so that's a full logic. This is not the this is an example only. So whatever your thread have to do, whatever you want your thread to do, you have to write those lines of code inside this run method. That's what I mean in general. Okay, so that was the first step we had to do when we extend the thread class. Now second step is to create the object of the class which extended the thread class. So here thread demo is a class which extended this thread class. So we are creating one object of that class thread demo t1 equal to new thread demo. See the constructor of thread demo, here it is receiving one string as parameter, so we have to pass that parameter here. So new thread demo of thread 1, so I'm naming the thread. So we can go scroll back and see what is the second step. Once object is ready, we have to start the thread by calling the start method. So here t1 is the thread object and I am starting it by t1.start. So this will start thread t1. So when we call the start method, Java virtual machine will call the run method. So all these lines will get executed. So what happens, t1.start. So first of all when we call this thread demo constructor, here it is printing system.out.println creating plus thread name. So our output, you can see first line will be printed creating thread 1. Then this thread 1 gets started. While it gets started, the next line, the Java will not wait, since it is a thread. While that thread is working, we can do another task also. That's the importance of thread. Threads are concurrent processes. We can do multiple things at the same time. That's the most important advantage of these threads. So when the thread 1 gets started, after that, when we call after this method being called, what happens? This run method starts working. At the same time, this thread t2 gets created. So new thread demo thread 2, again this constructor is called, this line gets printed. That is why we are getting the output as creating thread 2. Then again t2 will start by calling t2.start. Again the run method of t2 will start working. So now t1 and t2 are two different objects of class thread demo. So t1 will have its own run method, t2 also will have its own run method. So when t1 is running, t2 also will be running parallelly. Okay, so next what we are doing is, then after t2 gets started, then t1 will start its working. So running thread 1, that this line running thread 1. Okay, then this line will get printed. Thread name is 1 in this case, thread 1. Okay, thread 1 and value of I 4, this line will be printed, and then T1 will go for sleep for 50 milliseconds. At that time T2 will be working. So T2, the run method of T2 will execute these lines of code. So running thread 2 and thread 2 4 will be printed. Again T2 will go for sleeping. At that time T1 will awake. Then T1 will continue its working. Thread 1, the value of I will be decremented. Then thread 1 3 will be printed. Then thread 2 3. Then thread 1 2. So it will happen like that. So this is how we create threads by extending class thread. I hope you understood. The second way of creating thread is by implementing the runnable interface. So just now we saw how to create threads by inheriting a class named thread. Now we will see how to create threads by using an interface, and the interface name is runnable. This runnable interface I have got only one method, that is run. So in both thread class as well as in interface runnable also we have a method named run. Okay, and we have to write the output of both cases, even if we are creating threads by extending a thread class as well as even if we are creating thread by implementing runnable interface, the output will be same. Only the approach or only the creation of threads will be different. For creating threads by extending thread class, we have to perform only two steps. For creating a thread by implementing runnable interface, we have to perform 3 steps. That's the only difference. Output and working remains the same. So in thread class also we have to write the run method. In interface also we have to write the run method. So these are 3 steps that we have to keep in mind when we are planning to implement a thread by using runnable interface. The first step is to implement a run method provided by the interface. We know that there is only one method inside the runnable interface, and we know interface means a collection of abstract methods. So if there is an abstract method inside the interface, the class which uses or which implements the interface, they are responsible for providing the method body also. So if you are planning to implement the runnable interface, we must write the body of run method. That's what we mean by this implement run method. We have to write all the lines of code that we have to execute when our thread starts working inside this method, and syntax is same as the previous one, public void run. Second step is we have to create a thread object or instantiate a thread object by calling the constructor of thread class, this constructor. Okay, we have to create a thread object by using the following constructor. So we have seen there are 4 different constructors of class thread. Okay, in this case when we implement or when we create thread by implementing runnable interface, we have to create or we have to instantiate thread object by calling this constructor. The constructor is this one, thread, and it has got 2 parameters. One is the object and the other one is the thread name that we are going to give. So here first parameter is actually the object of the class which implements the interface. We will see one example, then it will be more clear. But basically the constructor of class thread which we are calling has got 2 parameters. First parameter is the object of the class that implements the interface, and second parameter is the name of the thread that we are giving to the thread. So this is the second step. Now third step is same as in the case of the previous method of creating thread by extending thread class, that you have to start the thread by calling the start method. So whenever we call the start method, JVM will call the run method. So even if we are calling the start method, the lines of code that gets executed is inside the run method. So these are 3 steps that you have to keep in mind. Now we will see one example and then explain. So here in the previous case, you can scroll back and see the class name was thread demo. That is not that important, but there it extended the thread class. Here it is implementing the runnable interface. So the both processes are different. Extend thread means it is inheritance. Implements runnable means it is using the interface runnable. Okay. Then see, I am creating a thread object, thread variable t. T is the a variable of type thread, where thread is a class name. Then runnable demo is a constructor. Then I am assigning current thread as t. Then I am giving yeah, I'm creating, I'm printing, creating sentences all are same, but the process is different. Then I am overriding, or I am implementing the run. I cannot say overriding, because overriding is available only in the case of inheritance. Here it is not inheritance. Here it is implementing. So inside this interface runnable, there is a run method. So I have to provide the body of run method. So I am providing that body here. I am writing all lines of code here. So my logic, or what my thread have to do, all those lines has to be inside in this method, run method. Okay, so here just the output is same, as we can see the output of the previous program by in which we extended class thread and this method, and by implementing runnable interface the output remains the same, but the steps of doing it is different. There we extended thread class, here we are implementing runnable interface. Okay, so we can just scroll back and see we have 3 steps. The first step is creating the writing the run, implementing the run method, that we have done. Second is we have to create the object of the class which implements the runnable interface. Here runnable demo is a class which implements this interface, so we have to create an object of this class. How to create that? Runnable demo r1 equal to new runnable. So this is how we are creating the object of class r1. Then what we have to do, we have to instantiate thread object by calling the constructor thread object name comma thread name. So see how we are calling it, thread t1 equal to new thread. This is not as instantiating. Here we are passing one parameter which is the object of the class runnable demo which implemented the runnable interface. So that's the first parameter, and second one is the name of the thread that we have to give. Then we have to call the start method. So these are 3 steps. One, implement the run method. Then instantiate the thread object by calling this constructor, and there we have to pass 2 parameters. One parameter is the object of the class which implemented the runnable interface, and second parameter is the name of the thread. So if you have to pass an object of the class which implemented the runnable interface, we have to create it first. That is why we have written this code. We are creating r1 here. R1 is the object of class runnable demo because it is this class which implemented runnable interface. So runnable demo r1 equal to new runnable demo. We got the object. We are passing that object as parameter to the thread class. So now t1 is one thread. Similarly, we are creating another thread t2. So t1 and t2 are through 2 threads. T1 will have got its run method. T2 also will have its run method. So when T1 sleeps, T2 runs. When T2 sleeps, T1 runs. So everything works in parallel. The output remains the same as in the case of previous method. So there are 2 ways in which we can create threads. That is all in this video lecture. I hope you understood the 2 different ways of creating threads. One is by extending class thread, where we are using inheritance, the concept of inheritance. The second method is by implementing runnable interface, where we are using the interface, the concept of interfaces. I hope you have understood. Thank you.